Everyone believed that in the wild world among the stars, no one dared to stand against the strongest, until she gave her last ration to a dying apex predator, and even the most bloodthirsty hunters respected him. Everyone believed that in the savage expanse between stars, the weak perish while the strong prevail. That was until she gave her last ration to a dying apex predator, and even the most bloodthirsty hunters came to respect him. The crimson light of twin suns cast long shadows across the jagged terrain of Ares IV. Radiation storms lashed the planet's surface with unrelenting fury, forcing the small mining colony to retreat into their reinforced shelters. Most considered this desolate outpost at the farthest reaches of the Joran Empire a death sentence. Some called it opportunity. Lyra Valen called it her responsibility. She stood at the edge of the compound, her environmental suit sensors screaming warnings about the radiation levels. The mining operation had barely survived 2 decades on this inhospitable rock, sustained only by the valuable radioactive ore beneath the surface. 20-odd miners depended on her skills as a biosurgeon and food resource manager, skills she'd honed during her years of military service on Earth, before seeking something different, something meaningful at the edge of known space. "Storm season again," Mira Soren said, approaching from behind. The tall, wiry mechanical engineer had been Lyra's only true friend since her arrival 6 months ago. "Third one this year, getting worse." Lyra nodded, watching the horizon where electromagnetic discharges illuminated the sky in violent bursts of energy. "The Death Storm, they call this one. Cheerful bunch, aren't they?" Mira's laugh was hollow. "Jax wants you to check the food supplies. Says we might be trapped inside for weeks if this one's as bad as the sensors predict." Lyra's stomach tightened. Food was always a concern on Ares IV. The hostile environment meant virtually nothing edible could be grown, and supply ships arrived infrequently at best. If the storm lasted longer than expected, they would face hard choices. "I'll do inventory now," she said, turning away from the approaching tempest. "The western storage unit hasn't been checked in a while." Mira frowned. "The one near the electromagnetic forest? Jax won't like that. Those trees discharge enough energy to fry your suit's systems, not to mention what lurks out there." Lyra had heard the stories, terrifying accounts of massive predators that ruled the barren landscapes, creatures that had evolved to thrive in the radiation-soaked environment. The miners spoke in hushed tones about the apex predator they called Zarthos, a beast that had claimed more than a few lives over the years. "I'll be quick," Lyra promised, "and careful." The western storage facility was the smallest of their food caches, built into the natural rock formations at the perimeter of their claim. As Lyra approached, her suit sensors detected the rising radiation levels from the bizarre forest of crystalline structures that the colonists called trees. They weren't organic in any traditional sense, more like conductive mineral formations that had grown over centuries, channeling and storing the planet's abundant electromagnetic energy. She worked efficiently, cataloging the remaining supplies. As she'd feared, the resources were dwindling faster than anticipated. The last shipment had been smaller than promised, and the colony was already on reduced rations. If the storm lasted more than 10 days, a thunderous crash outside interrupted her calculations. Lyra froze, listening. Another crash, followed by a sound that sent chills down her spine. A low, resonant growl unlike anything she'd heard before. Prudence dictated she should stay hidden, wait for whatever was out there to move on. But years of military medical training had instilled in her a responsibility she couldn't ignore. Something was in distress, sealing her helmet. Lyra cautiously emerged from the storage unit. The air crackled with energy from the approaching storm, casting an eerie red glow across the landscape. She followed the sounds, each step carefully placed, until she reached a small clearing at the edge of the electromagnetic forest. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Sprawled among the twisted, energy-discharging vines was a creature of impossible proportions. Its body was covered in iridescent purple scales that reflected light in hypnotic patterns. Though wounded and partially entangled, it was still larger than any predator Lyra had ever encountered, at least 12 meters from its massive head to the tip of its powerful tail. Blood, of an unusual blue-violet hue, pooled beneath multiple wounds on its body. With a start, Lyra realized what she was looking at. This was Zarthos, the apex predator of Ares IV, the monster that haunted the nightmares of every miner in the colony. And it was dying. The creature's eyes, intelligent, pain-filled eyes that glowed with an inner bioluminescence, fixed on her. It made no move to attack, though Lyra suspected it couldn't if it wanted to. It was trapped in the electromagnetic vines, which periodically discharged energy into its massive body. Near its largest wound, Lyra noticed unusual damage patterns, consistent with advanced weapons fire. "The Void Claw," she whispered to herself, recognizing the distinctive energy signature. The miners had spoken of another predatory species on Ares IV, one that used technology, including phase-shifting capabilities that made them nearly invisible until they struck. They were Zarthos's greatest rivals in the planet's brutal ecosystem. The creature growled again, a sound of pain and defiance. It was clearly dying, from its wounds, from radiation poisoning, from the repeated electrical discharges of the vines. Lyra stood frozen in indecision. Every survival instinct screamed at her to leave this dangerous predator to its fate. It had killed miners before. Its death would make the colony safer. Logic dictated she should turn around and never speak of what she'd found. But as a medical professional, she had sworn oaths. As a human being, she had principles that defined her. "I can't just watch you die," she said aloud, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words. Or could it? Something in those luminescent eyes suggested an intelligence far beyond that of a simple predator. Lyra made her decision, a fateful choice that would change everything. She returned to the storage unit and collected the emergency medical supplies she kept there. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she also took the last remaining food ration pack, high-density protein designed to sustain a hard-working miner for 3 days. It wouldn't be enough to save the creature, but it might give it a fighting chance. Back at the clearing, Zarthos hadn't moved. Its breathing was more labored now, each exhale releasing a small cloud of bioluminescent particles. Lyra approached cautiously, medical scanner in one hand, the other held out in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm going to try to help you," she said softly. "I don't know if you understand, but I'm not here to hurt you." The creature's eyes tracked her movements. It made no aggressive move as she came closer, which Lyra took as permission to proceed, or perhaps it was simply too weak to attack. First, she had to free it from the electromagnetic vines. Using an insulated cutting tool from her kit, she carefully severed the conductive plants, wincing each time they discharged energy in their death throes. The process was painstaking and dangerous, but after nearly an hour, she had freed most of the creature's massive body. Next came the wounds. The largest was a devastating gash across its torso, likely from a Void Claw weapon. Smaller injuries peppered its flanks. Lyra cleaned them as best she could with antiseptic gel, then applied polymer sealant to the worst of them. It wasn't proper treatment, but it might slow the bleeding long enough for the creature's obviously remarkable healing abilities to take over. Finally, she opened the ration pack. The concentrated protein inside was meant for human consumption, but Lyra hoped the creature could metabolize it. She placed small portions near its mouth, backing away quickly each time. To her amazement, Zarthos consumed the offerings, its massive jaws working with surprising delicacy. When the pack was empty, the creature's eyes fixed on her again, and Lyra could have sworn she saw something new there. Not gratitude, exactly, but recognition. "That's all I can do for now," she told it, gathering her supplies. I'll try to come back, but there's a storm coming. It might be days." As if in response to her words, the creature emitted a low, rumbling sound, different from its earlier growls of pain. Then it closed its eyes, its massive chest rising and falling in what seemed like more regular breaths. Lyra hurried back to the colony, her mind racing. What had she done? Saved a creature that might go on to kill more of her colleagues? Wasted precious food resources? Or honored her deepest principles as a healer? She thought of her father, a doctor during Earth's internal conflicts, who had once given his last meal to save a wounded villager. "We don't measure the value of life by its shape or species," he had told her. "A healer's duty is to preserve life, whenever possible." That night, as the death storm began to rage outside the colony's reinforced walls, Lyra lay awake, thinking of the wounded predator, and wondering if it would survive until she could return. She didn't know then that her choice, giving her last ration to a dying apex predator, would reshape the future of the entire colony. Days passed. The death storm raged with unprecedented fury, confining the miners to the underground portions of the colony. Tensions rose as supplies dwindled and cabin fever set in. Jax Kendron, the mining crew's leader, instituted stricter rationing, cutting portions to bare subsistence levels. "We've lost contact with the supply ship," he announced during a tense community meeting. "They're either delayed by the storm, or they've abandoned us entirely." Murmurs of discontent spread through the gathered miners. Lyra sat at the back, her thoughts divided between the crisis at hand and the wounded predator she'd left behind. Had it survived? Was her decision to help it, and to use valuable resources in the attempt, justified? "The situation is manageable," Jax continued, his weathered face betraying the strain he was under. "But only if we stick together. No hoarding, no special privileges." His eyes found Lyra, and she felt a chill. Did he suspect something? After the meeting, Mira pulled her aside. "What's wrong with you? You've been distracted since before the storm hit." Lyra hesitated. Mira was her friend, but this secret felt dangerous to share. Finally, she decided to trust her. "I found something out by the western storage. Something injured." Mira's eyes widened as Lyra described her encounter with Zarthos. "Are you insane?" she hissed when Lyra finished. "That thing has killed miners. Jax's brother died in an attack 3 years ago. That's why he hates those creatures more than anything." "It was dying," Lyra said defensively. "I couldn't just leave it." "And the rations? Our food supplies are critical, and you fed a monster?" The accusation stung, but Lyra stood her ground. "I made a choice. I stand by it." Mira stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Well, what's done is done. But Lyra, if Jax finds out—" "He won't," Lyra assured her. "Not from me, and not from you, right?" Mira nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful. This place, it changes people, makes them harder than they should be." The storm continued for 5 more days, trapping the colonists in increasingly dire circumstances. When it finally subsided enough for limited surface operations, Lyra volunteered for the first inspection team. "I need to check the medical supplies at all outposts," she explained to Jax, "and assess if any structures were damaged." He studied her with suspicious eyes. "Take someone with you." "I'll go," Mira volunteered quickly. "Need to check the power systems anyway." Outside, the landscape had been transformed by the storm. New formations of radioactive crystal had emerged, and parts of the terrain had been reshaped by lightning strikes and energy discharges. As they approached the western storage facility, Lyra's anxiety grew. What would they find? "It probably didn't survive," Mira said quietly, reading her thoughts. "That storm would have finished what the Void Claw started." But when they reached the clearing, Zarthos was gone. Only dark stains on the ground remained where it had lain, along with broken vines and disturbed earth. Something massive had moved through here, and recently. "It's alive!" Lyra breathed, a complex mixture of relief and apprehension flooding through her. Mira shook her head in disbelief. "Incredible! Those wounds should have been fatal, even for an apex predator." They searched the area, finding a trail of blue-violet blood droplets leading away from the clearing, toward a nearby ravine. Lyra was tempted to follow, but Mira pulled her back. "Are you crazy? If it survived, it's still dangerous. We need to report this." "Report what? That I helped an injured predator and now it's loose?" Lyra shook her head. "Jax would have me expelled from the colony." "Then what do you suggest?" Lyra considered her options. "We say nothing for now. I'll come back alone, see if I can find it. Make sure it's not a threat to the colony." Mira looked skeptical, but agreed. They completed their inspection and returned to the colony with their report, omitting any mention of Zarthos. That night, Lyra slipped away from the colony. It was risky. The radiation levels were still elevated from the storm, and night on Ares 4 brought its own dangers. But she had to know if the creature had survived, and if her actions had made any difference. She followed the blood trail to the ravine, then down a treacherous path into its depths. At the bottom, she found what appeared to be a den, a natural cave formation, partially concealed by fallen rock. And inside, barely visible in the dim light of her suit's illuminators, was Zarthos. The massive creature was conscious but clearly still weak. Its wounds had begun to heal, faster than Lyra would have thought possible, but it was far from recovered. It raised its head as she approached, those luminescent eyes fixing on her with unmistakable recognition. "You survived," Lyra said softly. "Good." She had brought more supplies this time, medical equipment and food she'd managed to set aside from her own rations. It wasn't much, but it might help the creature's recovery. To her surprise, Zarthos allowed her to approach and tend to its wounds. The creature seemed to understand that she was trying to help, or perhaps it simply lacked the strength to resist. Either way, Lyra worked quickly, cleaning the partially healed injuries and applying fresh polymer sealant where needed. When she offered food, the creature accepted it with the same careful movements as before. As it ate, Lyra studied it more closely. Its anatomy was fascinating, unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history. Its scales seemed to serve not just as protection, but as energy collectors, absorbing and processing radiation in some way she didn't fully understand. "You're beautiful," she told it, reaching out a tentative hand toward its flank. Zarthos flinched at first, then allowed the touch. Its scales were warm and vibrated slightly beneath her gloved fingers, as if conducting energy. "I'll come back when I can," she promised, gathering her supplies. "But I need to be careful. Not everyone would understand why I'm helping you." As she turned to leave, the creature made a sound, a complex pattern of growls and clicks that almost seemed like language. Lyra paused, looking back in surprise. But Zarthos had already closed its eyes, its massive body settling into what appeared to be rest. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra established a routine. During her official duties, she was the colony's dedicated biosurgeon, treating injuries and managing their dwindling medical supplies. But every third night, she slipped away to the ravine, bringing whatever supplies she could spare to tend to Zarthos. The apex predator improved steadily under her care. Its wounds closed, its energy returned, and it began to move more freely around the cave. Sometimes, Lyra would arrive to find it gone, only to have it return while she waited, dragging the carcass of some smaller creature it had hunted. More remarkably, it began to communicate. At first, just through sounds and gestures, but gradually, Lyra realized the creature was attempting to mimic her speech patterns. Its vocalizations became more structured, more deliberate, until one night, it produced sounds that unmistakably approximated words. "Who, man?" it growled, the sound reverberating in the cave. "Hide!" Lyra stared in astonishment. You can speak?" "Speak. Little," Zarthos responded, the words guttural but recognizable. "Learn. Watching." Intelligence reports from Earth had suggested the apex predators of Ares Thur might possess higher cognitive functions. But nothing had prepared Lyra for this. She was communicating with a non-human sentient species, one that had apparently been observing and learning from humans for some time. "Why do you say hide?" she asked. Zarthos made a gesture with one clawed limb, pointing toward the mouth of the ravine. "Void Claw, hunt. Soon." A chill ran down Lyra's spine. "The Void Claw are coming? Here?" "Yes. Hunt. Me, hunt. You." The implications were terrifying. If the Void Claw were massing for an attack, the entire colony could be in danger. Lyra had heard stories of their ruthlessness, their technological prowess despite their seemingly primitive social structure. "I need to warn the others," she said, gathering her supplies hurriedly. Zarthos made a sound that might have been agreement. "Go. Come. Back." Lyra hesitated at the entrance to the cave. "I will. I promise." But when she returned to the colony, she found chaos. A storage unit had been breached during the night, supplies stolen. Worse, a miner had been attacked while checking the perimeter, not killed, but badly injured with wounds consistent with Void Claw weapons. Jax had ordered an immediate security lockdown. "Nothing in or out," he declared, his face tight with anger and fear. "And we're forming search parties. Whatever did this is still out there." Lyra treated the injured miner, her mind racing. Should she tell Jax about the Void Claw threat? About Zarthos? Either revelation could put her in serious jeopardy, but lives were at stake. Before she could decide, Jax confronted her directly. "You've been sneaking out at night," he said, his voice low but intense. "Don't deny it. You've been seen." Lyra's heart sank. "I can explain." "Save it," he cut her off. "Whatever you're doing out there ends now. I've lost too many people to the creatures on this planet. I won't lose more because you have some misguided fascination with them." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And Lyra, if I find out you've been helping them in any way, there won't be a place for you in this colony anymore." The threat hung in the air long after he'd gone. Lyra sat alone in the medical unit, faced with an impossible choice. Continue helping Zarthos and risk expulsion from the colony, or abandon the creature that had come to trust her. That night, despite the lockdown, Lyra made her decision. Using Mira's access codes, she slipped out of the colony and hurried to the ravine. She had to warn Zarthos, had to learn more about the Void Claw threat. But when she arrived at the cave, she found someone already there, Jax Kendron, weapon raised, facing the wounded apex predator. "Stop!" Lyra shouted, rushing forward. "Don't shoot!" Jax turned, his face a mask of fury and betrayal. I knew it! You've been helping this monster!" Zarthos growled, a warning sound that reverberated through the cave. But it made no move to attack, its luminescent eyes darting between Lyra and Jax. "He's not a monster," Lyra said, stepping between them. "He's intelligent. He's been trying to warn us about the Void Claw." "Warn us?" Jax's laugh was bitter. "This thing has killed miners. It killed my brother." "And now it's trying to help us," Lyra insisted. "The Void Claw are planning something. An attack on the colony. Zarthos told me." "Zarthos!" Jax's voice dripped with contempt. "You've named it now?" "That's what the Void Claw call him. He's their enemy too." Jax's finger tightened on the trigger of his plasma rifle. "Stand aside, Lyra. That thing is too dangerous to live." Lyra didn't move. "If you fire that weapon in here, the plasma discharge will trigger a radiation cascade. We'll all die." It was a desperate bluff. Lyra had no idea if a plasma discharge would actually cause such a reaction, but it gave Jax pause. Behind her, Zarthos growled again, then spoke, the words halting but clear. Human, truth, Voidclaw, come, soon. Jax's eyes widened in shock. It can talk? Lyra corrected automatically. And yes, he's been learning our language. For a long moment, Jax stood frozen, weapon still raised. Then, slowly, he lowered it, though his expression remained wary. Explain, he demanded. Everything? Lyra told him about finding Zarthos wounded, about treating his injuries and bringing him food. She explained how the creature had begun to communicate, warning her about the Voidclaw threat. They've been preparing an attack, she concluded. That's why there have been sightings near the colony. They're scouting our defenses. Jax looked skeptical. And why would this Zarthos want to help us? Enemy of enemy, Zarthos rumbled. I fight. Voidclaw. Long time. A territorial war, Lyra realized. The apex predators and the Voidclaw had been locked in conflict for dominance of Ares IV long before humans arrived. So we have a common enemy, Jax said slowly. That doesn't make us allies. No, Lyra agreed. But it gives us a chance to survive. The Voidclaw have technology, Jax, phase-shifting capabilities, advanced weapons. We can't fight them alone. Jax stared at Zarthos for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Lyra. The Council of Overseers will never approve this. They'd sooner have us all evacuate than ally with a native predator. Then don't tell them, Lyra suggested. Not yet. Let me continue working with Zarthos. He can help us prepare. Maybe even tell us where the Voidclaw are vulnerable. It was a tremendous risk, asking Jax to keep such a secret. But to her surprise, he nodded slowly. My brother used to say that survival on Ares IV means adapting to impossible situations, he said quietly. I never thought that would include making peace with the thing that killed him. Not kill brother? Zarthos interjected unexpectedly. Remember, human, yellow hair, fell, cliff. Jax stared at the creature in shock. What did you say? Voidclaw. Push. Try help. Too late. Lyra looked between them, understanding dawning. Jax, is he saying? My brother had blonde hair, Jax said, his voice barely audible. We found his body at the bottom of the eastern ridge. Everyone assumed it was a predator attack. But Voidclaw, Zarthos confirmed. Always. A moment of profound silence filled the cave. Then Jax straightened, his decision made. You have 1 week, he told Lyra. Get him healthy enough to fight. Learn whatever you can about the Voidclaw. After that, we decide, as a colony, what to do next. It wasn't the outcome Lyra had expected, but it was more than she had hoped for. Thank you. Jax's eyes were hard. Don't thank me yet. If this goes wrong, if anyone else dies because of your pet monster, it's on your head. He left without another word, leaving Lyra and Zarthos alone in the cave. Brave, human, Zarthos observed after a moment. Like you. Lyra sank down against the cave wall, suddenly exhausted. I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Fear. Good. Keeps alive. The massive creature settled beside her, its warmth radiating through her environmental suit. We prepare. Fight Voidclaw. Together. Together. The word echoed in Lyra's mind. A human and an apex predator, allies against a common threat. It seemed impossible, yet here they were. The next week passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Jax kept Lyra's secret, though he insisted on being present during her visits to Zarthos. Gradually, His fear of the apex predator gave way to a grudging respect, especially as Zarthos shared valuable intelligence about the Void Claw. Void Claw. Weak. Here. The creature indicated a spot just below what would be a collarbone on a human. Energy. Source. Phase shift. Device. Mira, who had been brought into their confidence, studied the crude diagram they'd sketched. If we could disrupt their phase-shifting technology, they'd be vulnerable. But how do we hit a target we can barely see? I see them, Zarthos explained. Different vision. The apex predator, they learned, could perceive wavelengths of light invisible to humans, allowing it to track the Void Claw even when they were phase-shifted. So Zarthos is our targeting system, Jax mused. But we still need weapons that can affect them. Mira had been working on that problem. I've been analyzing the energy signature from the injured miner's wounds. If I can replicate it, maybe create a disruption field that interferes with their phase shifting. Lyra marveled at how quickly their small group had adapted to the alliance with Zarthos. The creature continued to improve physically, its remarkable healing abilities accelerated by proper care and nutrition. More surprisingly, its language skills developed rapidly. By the end of the week, it could communicate in complete, if still simple, sentences. Void Claw Leader, Zerclaw. It told them during one session. Hates humans. Hates me more. Wants territory. All territory. Charming fellow, Mira muttered. When will they attack? Jax asked. Zarthos's luminescent eyes dimmed slightly. Soon. Very soon. After next dark cycle. They had less than 2 days to prepare. Jax made his decision. It's time to tell the colony. All of it. The meeting was as chaotic as Lyra had feared. The miners reacted with shock and anger when Jax revealed their alliance with Zarthos and the looming Void Claw threat. You've been harboring the very creature that's been terrorizing us for years, one miner shouted. It's killed our people, another added. Lyra stepped forward. Many of those attacks were actually the Void Claw. They've been using our fear of the apex predators to cover their own activities. And we're supposed to just take your word for that? The question came from a representative of the Council of Overseers, who had joined the meeting via communication link. This is outrageous. Kendrin, you've compromised the entire colony. Jax stood his ground. What I've done is find us an ally against a threat that could wipe us out completely. The Void Claw are preparing to attack, and our normal defenses won't stop them. Then we evacuate, the council representative declared. I'm ordering an immediate withdrawal of all personnel from Ares 4. There's no time, Mira interjected. The attack is coming tomorrow. The nearest evacuation ship is at least 4 days away. A tense silence fell over the group. Finally, a young miner named Typon spoke up. I want to see it. The apex predator. If we're going to fight alongside this thing, I want to know what we're dealing with. Others murmured agreement. Jax looked to Lyra, who nodded slowly. It was time. They brought Zarthos to the colony under heavy guard. The massive creature moved cautiously, clearly uncomfortable in the human structure, but making every effort to appear non-threatening. The miners watched in a mixture of fear and fascination as it ducked to enter the main gathering area. This is Zarthos, Lyra introduced, feeling absurdly like she was presenting a new colleague. He's been helping us prepare for the Void Claw attack. To everyone's shock, Zarthos spoke. I protect territory. You, in territory. Void Claw, enemy of all. The simple declaration shifted the atmosphere in the room. The miners had expected a mindless beast. What they got was an intelligent being capable of reason and alliance. It can talk, Typon whispered, awestruck. Lyra corrected gently. And yes, he can... The council representative sputtered in disbelief. This changes nothing. We cannot ally ourselves with a native predator species. The diplomatic implications alone. With all due respect, Jax interrupted. We're beyond diplomacy. This is about survival. The debate raged for hours. But in the end, pragmatism won out. The colony simply had no choice. The Void Claw were coming, and their only hope lay in the unusual alliance they'd formed. Through the night, they prepared. Mira and her team worked feverishly to complete a prototype disruption device based on Zarthos's information. Others reinforced the colony's defenses as best they could, though all knew that physical barriers would do little against an enemy that could phase through solid matter. Lyra found herself in the medical unit, preparing for casualties. As she worked, Zarthos entered, ducking through the doorway that was far too small for his massive frame. Humans, afraid, he observed, but brave. Lyra nodded, sorting medical supplies with practiced efficiency. Fear doesn't stop bravery. Sometimes it causes it. The apex predator was silent for a moment, then said, "Why, help me? First time, when dying?" It was a question Lyra had asked herself many times. Because it was the right thing to do. Because every life has value. Even predator life? Hunter life? Even then. She paused in her work, looking up at the magnificent creature. My father used to say that we don't measure the value of life by its shape or species. A healer's duty is to preserve life, whenever possible. Zarthos seemed to consider this. Your father, wise. You, wise too. Before Lyra could respond, alarms blared throughout the colony. Jax's voice came over the communication system. They're here! Multiple breaches at the eastern perimeter! All personnel to defensive positions! The Void Claw attack had begun. Chaos erupted as miners rushed to their assigned positions. Lyra grabbed her medical kit, but Zarthos blocked her path. You, stay here, safe. I need to help the wounded, she insisted. The apex predator shook its massive head. No time. Void Claw. Not take prisoners. Kill all. Before Lyra could argue further, the lights flickered and died, plunging the colony into darkness. Emergency illumination activated moments later, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Power systems compromised, Mira's voice reported over the comm. They're targeting our infrastructure. From outside came the sounds of weapons fire and shouts of alarm. The colony's defenses were engaging the attackers, but without the ability to see the phase-shifted Void Claw, they were firing blindly. We need Zarthos out there, Jax called over the comm. He's the only one who can track them. Lyra looked at the apex predator, who was already moving toward the door. Be careful, she said, knowing how inadequate the words were. Zarthos paused, those luminescent eyes fixing on her one more time. You gave last food. When dying, Zarthos remembers. Then he was gone, his massive form surprisingly swift as he moved to join the battle. Left alone in the medical unit, Lyra prepared for the inevitable casualties. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she should be doing more. Zarthos was out there fighting for them, fighting for her. She couldn't just wait for the outcome. Decision made. She grabbed an emergency kit and a weapon Mira had modified with the disruption technology. Then, she headed for the sound of battle. The scene outside was chaotic. Miners fired desperately at enemies they couldn't see, while Zarthos moved among them, calling out positions and trying to direct their fire. But the Void Claw were too numerous, their phase-shifting technology giving them an overwhelming advantage. In the center of the colony's main courtyard, Lyra spotted Zarthos engaged in direct combat, with what appeared to be empty air. Until suddenly, a Void Claw partially materialized as the apex predator's claws connected with its phase-shifting device. The creature was smaller than Zarthos, but wiry and vicious, its body covered in dark, chitinous armor, its face a nightmare of mandibles and compound eyes. Other Void Claws circled them, occasionally becoming partially visible as they attacked, then disappearing again. Zarthos fought magnificently, his massive tail sweeping attackers aside, his claws finding targets even when they were invisible to human eyes. But he was outnumbered, and Lyra could see fresh wounds opening on his flanks. Nearby, Mira was hunched over what looked like a makeshift control panel. "The disruption field isn't working," she shouted when she saw Lyra. "Something's interfering with the signal." Lyra scanned the battlefield, trying to make sense of the chaos. Then, she spotted something unusual, a shimmer in the air near the colony's main power generator. Not the typical distortion of a phase-shifted void claw, but something larger, more deliberate. "There," she pointed. "They have some kind of device." Mira followed her gaze, squinting. "I see it. That must be what's blocking our disruption field. If we can take it out—" "I'll go," Lyra decided, checking her weapon. "You keep working on a backup plan." Before Mira could protest, Lyra was moving, keeping low and using the confusion of battle as cover. She made her way toward the power generator, where the strange shimmer continued to pulse rhythmically. As she drew closer, she could make out the device, a translucent sphere embedded in the generator housing, emitting waves of energy that seemed to bend light around it. A void claw stood guard beside it, though it was difficult to track as it phased in and out of visibility. Lyra took aim with her modified weapon and fired. The disruption beam struck the Guardian Void Claw, causing its phase shifting to fail momentarily, just long enough for Lyra to fire again, this time with lethal effect. The creature collapsed, but its death cry alerted others. Lyra could sense movement around her, the air shifting as invisible attackers converged on her position. She fired desperately into the empty space, hoping to hit something, but knowing she was outnumbered. A searing pain lanced through her arm as a void claw weapon found its mark. Lyra stumbled, nearly dropping her gun, but managed to stay upright. The power generator was just meters away now, the disruptor device pulsing more rapidly, as if sensing the threat. With a final surge of determination, Lyra lunged forward, firing directly at the device. The disruption beam connected, causing the sphere to flicker and destabilize. She fired again and again, until the device shattered with a sound like breaking glass, releasing a wave of energy that rippled outward. Across the battlefield, Void Claw soldiers suddenly became visible as their phase-shifting technology failed. The miners, now able to see their enemies, rallied, their weapons finding targets with new precision. But Lyra had no time to celebrate. A towering figure materialized before her, larger than the other Void Claw, with more elaborate armor and a crown-like structure on its head. Zerclaw, the leader. It snarled something in its own language, a sound of pure hatred, and raised a weapon unlike any Lyra had seen before, a blade that seemed to exist partly in phase space, its edges blurring and shifting. Lyra raised her own weapon, but Zerclaw was faster. It struck, the phase blade passing through her gun as if it weren't there, slicing it in half. She staggered backward, defenseless, as the Void Claw leader advanced. A thunderous roar shook the air. Zarthos appeared, launching himself at Zerclaw with such force that both creatures were thrown against the power generator. The structure buckled under their combined weight, sparks flying as components shorted out. Lyra scrambled for cover as the two apex predators of Ares IV engaged in mortal combat. Zerclaw's phase blade slashed at Zarthos, opening new wounds across his scaled hide. But the larger creature fought with a fury Lyra had never witnessed before. His massive jaws snapped, his claws raked, and from deep within his body came a strange, building energy, a bioluminescent glow that intensified with each passing second. Around them, the battle continued to rage, but it had shifted decisively in the colonists' favor. Without their phase-shifting advantage, the Void Claw were vulnerable, and the miners pressed their advantage with desperate determination. Zerclaw seemed to realize the tide had turned. With a final, vicious slash that left Zarthos reeling. It activated some kind of emergency device on its armor. The phase-shifting effect intensified around it. But something was wrong. The technology was unstable after the destruction of the disruptor device. The Void Claw leader began to phase in and out rapidly. Its body caught between states of matter. It screeched in what sounded like agony, its form becoming increasingly distorted. Lyra, seeing an opportunity, grabbed a fallen miner's weapon and fired at the half-phased creature. The shot connected, striking the phase-shifting device embedded in Zerklaw's chest. The effect was catastrophic. The device imploded, leaving the Void Claw leader partially materialized, its body grotesquely trapped between dimensions. With a final, terrible cry, Zerklaw collapsed, its remaining followers retreating in disarray. Zarthos stood over his fallen enemy, blood flowing from multiple wounds, but still standing. Around the colony, the sounds of battle began to fade as the surviving Void Claw fled into the wilderness. Lyra approached the apex predator cautiously. "Zarthos, are you all right?" The massive creature turned to her, those luminescent eyes dimming with exhaustion. "Victory," he managed, before his legs buckled beneath him. Lyra rushed forward, medical training taking over as she assessed his injuries. They were severe. Multiple lacerations, energy weapon burns, and what appeared to be phase damage to tissue where Zerklaw's blade had struck. "I need help here," she called. "Mira, Jax, anyone!" To her surprise, it was Tipon who appeared first. The young miner's face dirty and bloodied but determined. "What do you need?" "Medical supplies, as much as you can carry, and help moving him to shelter." Others joined them. Miners who, hours before, had feared Zarthos now working together to save the apex predator who had fought for their colony. With careful coordination, they managed to move Zarthos to a sheltered area where Lyra could work. His massive body barely fit in the space, but it was the best they could do. For hours, she worked tirelessly, cleaning wounds, applying polymer sealant, and administering what medications she thought might help. All the while, Zarthos drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words in his own language or in broken human speech. Once, he opened his eyes fully and fixed them on Lyra. "Last ration," he said, the words barely audible. "Made difference." "Save your strength," Lyra told him, fighting back tears. "You need to heal." Around them, the colony began the process of recovery. The attack had been repelled, but at significant cost. Several miners had been killed, others wounded. Infrastructure was damaged, supplies depleted. Yet, there was a sense of cautious triumph. They had faced one of Ares Thurfo's deadliest threats, and survived. Days passed. Zarthos's condition stabilized, then slowly began to improve. His remarkable healing abilities, once given proper support, worked wonders. Lyra spent most of her time tending to him and the other wounded, sleeping only when exhaustion forced her to. A week after the battle, Jax called another colony meeting. The mood was somber, but resolute as he addressed the assembled miners. "We've survived," he began simply. "Thanks to our own courage, our resourcefulness, and yes, thanks to an ally none of us could have imagined." He glanced toward the makeshift medical facility where Zarthos was recovering. "The Council of Overseers has demanded a full report, and I've given them one. They're processing the implications." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Everyone knew what that meant: bureaucratic hand-wringing and potential repercussions. "In the meantime," Jax continued, "we have decisions to make. The Void Claw have been driven back, but they're not defeated. They'll regroup, possibly return. We need to be prepared." Tipon stood. "What about Zarthos? Is he staying?" The question hung in the air. All eyes turned to Lyra, who had become the de facto interpreter of the apex predator's intentions. "That's up to him," she said carefully. He's still recovering, but I believe he considers this territory his home, and now, perhaps, he considers us part of that territory. So we're what, under his protection now? Someone called out. Jax answered, before Lyra could. I prefer to think of it as a mutual defense arrangement. We helped him. He helped us. That's how survival works on Ares 4. The discussion continued. Practical matters of rebuilding and security, taking precedence over philosophical questions of interspecies alliance. But the tone had changed. There was a new respect for the hostile world they inhabited, and for the unexpected ally they had found in its apex predator. As the meeting concluded, a message arrived from the Council of Overseers. Jax read it silently, his expression revealing nothing. Then he looked up. The Council has reviewed our situation, he announced. They've decided to increase our supply shipments and send additional personnel, including scientific specialists to study our new arrangement. It wasn't the condemnation many had feared, but neither was it a full endorsement. The bureaucracy was adapting, cautiously, to an unprecedented situation. Later, Lyra sat with Zarthos under the strange red light of Ares the Fool's twin suns. The apex predator had insisted on moving outside, despite his injuries, claiming the radiation actually helped his healing process. Lyra suspected it was more about freedom after days confined indoors. He needed open space. Council, sends more humans? He asked, his speech now flowing more naturally after weeks of practice. Lyra nodded. And more supplies. They're interested in you. Study me. It wasn't a question. Like, specimen. They'll try, Lyra admitted. But they'll learn what we've learned. That you're not just a specimen. You're a person, with your own will and intelligence. Zarthos was silent for a moment, his luminescent eyes tracking the movement of clouds across the alien sky. Void Claw will return, with more, always more. We'll be ready, Lyra assured him, though she wondered if it was true. The colony had been lucky this time. Next time. Protect, Zarthos said, as if reading her thoughts. Territory. Humans in territory. My responsibility. The declaration was simple, but profound. Zarthos had expanded his concept of territory, and those worthy of protection within it, to include the human colonists. And we'll protect you, Lyra promised. That's what allies do. In the weeks that followed, a new normalcy emerged. Zarthos recovered fully, his massive form once again powerful and imposing. But now, instead of causing fear among the miners, his presence brought a sense of security. He established a new den near the colony, close enough to respond to threats, but far enough to maintain his independence. More remarkably, other colonists began to learn his language, just as he had learned theirs. Tipon, especially, showed an aptitude for communication with the apex predator, spending hours each day in conversation with him, learning about Ares 4 from a perspective no human had ever accessed before. The promised supplies arrived, along with a small team of scientists eager to study both Zarthos and the remains of Voidclaw technology salvaged from the battle. Lyra found herself acting as a bridge between the scientific team and the apex predator, a role that drew on both her medical background and the unique trust she had established. It's remarkable, one scientist told her after a particularly productive session. We've been on Ares 4 for 2 decades, and we understood almost nothing about its true ecology. One act of compassion from you has opened up an entirely new approach to colonization. Lyra thought about that often, how a single decision, made in a moment of crisis, had changed everything. Giving her last ration to a dying apex predator had seemed foolish, perhaps even self-destructive at the time. Yet it had created a bond that ultimately saved the entire colony. 3 months after the battle, A formal alliance was established between the human colony and Zarthos's territory. The document, drafted with input from both species, recognized mutual interests and responsibilities. It was the first interspecies treaty on Ares IV, possibly the first of its kind in the Joran Empire. On the day the treaty was finalized, Lyra stood with Zarthos at the edge of the electromagnetic forest where she had first found him. The landscape had changed since then. New crystal formations had emerged after the Death Storm, and parts of the terrain had been reshaped by the battle with the Voidclaw. But the essential wildness of Ares IV remained, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked the apex predator. "When I found you here, dying, did you ever think we would become allies?" Zarthos considered the question. His massive head tilted slightly. "No," he answered honestly. "Humans were food or threat, not allies." "And now?" "Now, different." He turned those luminescent eyes toward the colony in the distance. "You gave last ration when I was nothing. That changes everything." Lyra nodded, understanding. In the harsh environment of Ares IV, where survival was never guaranteed, such an act of compassion was revolutionary. It had broken through barriers of species and instinct, creating something new and unexpected. As they stood together, human and apex predator, the twin suns of Ares IV began to set, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape. In the distance, a supply ship was landing at the colony, bringing new resources and personnel, evidence of the Empire's growing interest in their unusual situation. "More changes come," Zarthos observed, watching the ship descend. "Yes," Lyra agreed, "but we'll face them together." The apex predator made a sound that Lyra had come to recognize as laughter, a rumbling, vibrating tone that seemed to resonate with the crystalline structures around them. "Together," he repeated, the word no longer foreign to him. Human and apex predator, strongest, together. As darkness fell on Ares IV, Lyra reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a desperate act of compassion to an alliance that had changed everything. The path had been neither straight nor easy. There would be challenges ahead. The Voidclaw would return. The Empire would make demands, and the harsh realities of Ares IV would continue to test them all. But in giving her last ration to a dying apex predator, Lyra had discovered a truth that transcended species and worlds. That compassion, even in the face of fear and scarcity, could create bonds stronger than any natural force. And in the wild world among the stars, such bonds might be the key to survival itself. They walked back to the colony together, human and apex predator, silhouetted against the rising moons of Ares IV, a sight that would have seemed impossible just months before. Now, a symbol of hope in a hostile universe. Zarthos's massive form moved with grace beside her, his scales reflecting the moonlight in hypnotic patterns. Once the most feared predator on the planet, now the colony's greatest defender. And it had all begun with a single choice: to see value in life, regardless of its form. The last ration had not been wasted after all. It had been the first investment in a future none of them could have imagined. A future where the strongest survived not by dominating others, but by forming unexpected alliances in the face of common threats. As they reached the edge of the colony, where miners and scientists alike now greeted Zarthos without fear, Lyra knew that they had created something unprecedented, not just a treaty between species, but a new understanding of what it meant to survive on Ares IV. "Home," Zarthos said simply, looking at the collection of structures and people before them. Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of the word. "Home," she agreed, "for all of us." And in that moment, under the alien sky of a hostile world, home had never felt more certain.